Culture, the culture of a program, locker room culture. This phrase we hear all the time. It seems like it's something you never really think about, um, or at least never is really never discussed unless things are really, really bad. Now, sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes, if things are really, really good for an extended period of time, you'll hear about a team's culture. But generally speaking, you don't tend to talk about a team's culture or a locker room culture, especially like week to week during a season when you're breaking down games or talking about matchups or players or playoff possibilities or conference championship situations. Just something that it rarely comes up, but when it comes up, boy, you you can't help but laugh, unless it's your team that's involved, right? This is some bad situations going on at Texas A&M and Miami, and I think it's kind of there are it's similar issues, I think, at both Miami and Texas A&M with completely different underlying causes, right? And I don't know, y'all can let me know in the comments which you think is worse. I mean, obviously, look, first of all, which team is worse, Texas A&M or Miami? Texas A&M is sitting at 3-7. Their remaining games are against UMass and who do they play? LSU. So they're probably going to win one more game, finish with 4 wins. Miami is 5-5. Their next 2 games are against Clemson this week and then Pitt. They're not beating Clemson. Maybe they beat Pitt, so at most they're going to finish with 6 wins. So if you just want to look at record, okay, Texas A&M looks a little worse, but we have to remember Texas A&M actually played this year, and Texas A&M won. So the point is not really who's worse between the two. They're both really bad this year. I think we know that. And you're just starting to hear stories and articles and rumors and tweets and kind of gossip and just stuff bubbling up to the surface about both of these, not necessarily these teams, but these programs, right? And there's a difference between a team and a program. A team changes from year to year, especially in college football, right? In college football, every year you're going to be losing between 20 and 30 people, either between graduation, early entry to the NFL, or now the transfer portal. You're losing between 20 and 30 players. Now, when you have 85 scholarship players and you're losing 20 to 30 of them a year, that's a lot. So you have a lot of turnover in college football. So you have a different team every year in college football, even if the coaches remain the same, even if you got a bunch of starters coming back on one side of the ball or the other or both. You have a different team every single year to year in college football. And a team can be changed relatively quickly, right? Especially with the transfer portal. Southern Cal is kind of like the prime example of this. They were 4-8 last year, their worst team in 50 years. And this year, going into week 12, they're in playoff consideration. They got to win out against 3 ranked teams. But the point is, you can transform a team dramatically in 1 year. You can't transform a locker room problem or a culture, though, that quickly, can you? Or can you? I think it depends. Let's look at Miami and Texas A&M now. Texas A&M's an absolute mess. They're one of the 5 or 6 most talented teams in the country. That's not an opinion. That's a scientific fact based off of recruiting data over the last 4 or 5 years. Plus, who's transferred out and who's transferred in. They're just one of the 5 or 6 most talented teams. They were in the top 10 in every single preseason poll on planet Earth. And they're going to be lucky to win 4 games this year. 5 games this year. So clearly, they're absolutely horrible. But Jimbo's been there 5 years. You look at Miami, they're horrible too. I know they've got a first-year coach. That's really the only difference, but that's a big difference, and we're going to get to some of that. But both of these teams have drastically underperformed expectations for this current football season, right? And that's okay if that's all it is, or that's all it looks like it's going to be. But there are culture issues at work here at Texas A&M and Miami that may or may not be able to be changed quickly or in the course of a year. Again, let's start with Texas A&M. I just don't know if this is something that can be changed at Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher, this isn't his first year there. He's been there 5 years. You got a situation where you basically went out and bought a bunch of mismatched pieces through recruiting and NIL, and they don't seem to be fitting in with each other as a recruiting class, and they definitely don't seem to be fitting in with the roster that was already there, the upperclassmen. Look, recruiting is important, and you need to have good players, and you need to have a lot of good players to be successful consistently in major college football. There's no doubt and no question about it. But those pieces have to fit. You can't just take every highly rated player that's willing to sign an NIL deal with you and expect them to fit in. It's not working at Texas A&M. Then you've got some of the other issues, players getting suspended because it's cold and they want to wear arm sleeves. And, Jimbo Fisher says no. Well, this player gets to wear them. Well, but he plays a different position. It's just weird. Culture issues at Texas A&M. And when you have a coach that's been there for 4 or 5 years, and there are locker room issues or culture issues, it's hard to point the finger at anyone else other than the head coach, right? Players come and go every year like we just talked about. Texas A&M has been muddling around the 8-4 mark forever. Now this year the bottom just completely falls out. Players suspended because getting in some trouble in the locker room on an away game against South Carolina and Columbia. Come back home a week or 2 later. The kid's suspended because he wants to wear arm sleeves. Is that an important enough rule? Is that the type of rule you really want to be enforcing? I mean, it just seems like a really bad situation at Texas A&M. And in my opinion, and you might think Miami's a worse team this year than Texas A&M. Okay, whatever. I think the culture and the locker room issue at Texas A&M is just worse than it is at Miami, at least in terms of it being harder to fix. The reason I say that, you look at Miami, they brought in a first-year head coach, or a new head coach. He's been a head coach before, but they bring in a new head coach. It's not really a surprise to me that they bring a new head coach in, and you end up with several people, several players, who knows how many, a handful or more, in the locker room that don't necessarily like the way the new coach does things compared to the old coach. If you ever had a job where your manager or your boss or whoever either got fired, got a promotion to somewhere else, changed locations, whatever, and all of a sudden you show up to work one day and you've got a brand new boss. Well, you're used to doing things a certain way. Your old boss had, your old boss liked to have things done a certain way. Your old boss was strict about these set of things, but lenient about this other set of things, right? And you kind of learn to operate within that environment. Well, then you bring a new boss in, or in this case for Miami, a new head coach. He does things completely differently than the other guy. He places emphasis on these things, whereas the other coaching staff kind of, didn't maybe take those things too seriously. And then on the other hand, it's the opposite. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that you've got some kids and some players in the Miami locker room who maybe don't like the way the new head coach is handling things, right? Maybe the new head coach, or maybe the old head coach told these recruits a certain thing. You'll be playing by your sophomore year. You'll be playing this position. You can have this number. You can do this. You can do that. New coach comes in. He's not bound by any of that stuff. It's the whole his way or the highway type deal, and that's the way it is. So that in and of itself is not uncommon, right? And at the beginning of this year, if you would have asked me, I would have told you, regardless of what Miami's record turns out to be this year, I won't be shocked at all if you see several players from Miami enter the portal after this season. Coaching change, new philosophy. Maybe this isn't the case for Miami. I'm just using this as an example. Maybe Miami ran a certain offense before and you're a wide receiver and you said, I want to go to Miami to play in that offense. Now this coach comes in and run that type of offense. So you say, you know what, I probably need to transfer somewhere else. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, that's not what I'm saying is happening in Miami. I'm just saying in general, when you get a new coach and a new staff, and you can expect some transfers. But this situation at Miami where the parents are getting involved, this is ridiculous. First of all, if I was one of these players, I'd be irate. How embarrassing is it to be a major, or to be a player at a major Power 5 college football program like Miami? And we can all laugh at Miami and talk about 20 years and not being able to do anything in the ACC. And yeah, that's hilarious. But the reality is Miami's a major Power 5 football program. How embarrassing does it have to be that you're a player at a major Power 5 program, University of Miami, and your mother is running around complaining to the coach about your playing time? This ain't Little League. This ain't Midget League football or whatever they're calling it, Pop Warner football. You don't sign up and your kid is guaranteed to play at least one quarter a game. That's not how this works. I've never seen this before. I'm sure stuff like this has happened behind the scenes. I'm sure. The Clemson quarterback, the ukulele, his dad is way too active on social media and sticks his nose in Clemson football business, and it's not a good look. And I'm sure the people at Clemson wish he wouldn't do it, and I'm sure DJ Ukulele wishes he wouldn't do it. But outside of that, you don't ever hear about this. I'm sure there have been situations where parents have called a coach a year or two after the kid has been there and been like, hey, what's going on? Why is he not playing? Should we consider transferring? That kind of thing. I'm sure that happens, private calls between parents and coaches. But this running around in the media, on Twitter and everywhere else, or telling anybody that'll listen, complaining about your kids' playing time. I mean, it's public knowledge. These parents are going to the coaches and complaining to the point where Mario Cristobal had to go on the radio and basically send out a public service announcement saying, look, lady, this ain't Little League. You're not, I mean, people, I mean, it's just a bad situation at Miami. And here's the thing with culture problems. They're exaggerated or brought to the surface when you have a bad team, right? If you have a good team, that can mask a bad culture, at least for a little while. Look at Florida State. It was not a good culture at Florida State in the early 2010s when Jimbo was there, winning a national title with Jameis Winston, making the playoffs the year after. Those were two good teams. It was not a good culture there. That same toxic culture that was at Florida State when Jimbo Fisher was there has followed Jimbo Fisher to Texas A&M. The difference is there are no wins and no good teams to mask it. So all of this stuff is bubbling to the surface. This is obviously a much bigger deal for Texas A&M than it is Miami. Miami's got a first-year coaching staff. Some of this stuff is to be expected. Like I said, I'm not using that to make an excuse for Miami's record and performance this year as a team. It's clearly below where it should have been. The blowout to Middle Tennessee State and the loss to Duke, maybe some of the other stuff you can excuse, look past, make excuses for, even find a way to accept in year one of the Cristobal era at Miami. There's nothing you can say or tell me that makes it okay what happened against Middle Tennessee State and Duke. It's just unacceptable under any circumstances. But it is a first-year staff there. And the recruiting is trending in the right direction. I know they lost Rashada last week, but look, you're going to have a lot of players flipping back and forth over the next couple of weeks leading up to early signing day. It's not that big of a surprise to me. What's going on at Texas A&M is a much bigger deal because Jimbo has been there for 5 or 6 years now, going into a 6th year next year, I guess it is. Has one of the biggest contracts in all of college football, $95 million guaranteed right now. Goes down about $10 million a year. That means next year is $85 million. They're stuck with him. It's a terrible culture. The players don't appear to like him or respect him. Jimbo told this kid, you can't wear the sleeves. Now, I think that's ridiculous. There are certain things I think it's okay for a coach to clamp down on. If a kid is more comfortable wearing the long sleeves, let him wear the long sleeves. What is that hurting? It's picking and choosing these random, made-up rules that you're going to enforce. But he told the kid, no, you don't wear the sleeves. Kid wore them anyway. He didn't give a shit what Jimbo said. Now, Jimbo ended up suspending him, but the point is, if you're garnering any respect at all inside your locker room as a head coach, and you come to a player, a kid, the team, and say, hey, we're not doing this. We're not wearing sleeves. The kids might not like it, but guess what? They ain't going to wear the sleeves. There's no respect for Jimbo Fisher in that locker room, and it's bad. And then you got the upperclassmen that don't like the way the underclassmen were treated in their recruitment and all the money that they got. There's the jealousy going on. Those juniors and seniors didn't get that NIL money when they were recruited. They earned it the way they were supposed to, the way NIL is intended, which is come to this school because you want to come to this school. If you do good, if you play well, we've got a bunch of people that are ready to sponsor you. That's the way it's supposed to work. Not guaranteeing them millions of dollars out of high school, which is what Texas A&M did. We all know what they did. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't against the rules. It's their philosophy of NIL. They're choosing to pay people for their name, image, and likeness before they've ever taken a snap at the college level. And again, I'm not here to say that's illegal or right or wrong or whatever. It's a different philosophy than what teams like Georgia and Bama are operating under right now. Now, maybe that changes down the road. I don't know. But the sort of meaning of NIL is if you come to college and you're a popular player, whether it's because you're really, really good or you have a great personality or for whatever reason, the car dealership down the road can give you 50 grand for a couple of commercials. That's what NIL was intended for. Not to give Nico, I'm about to leave you, $8 million to move from Compton, California, or wherever he lives, to the Hills Have Eyes there in Knoxville for $8 million, $2 million a year. That's not what it was intended for. And again, that's not to point out that Tennessee is doing anything wrong, but they're taking the Texas A&M approach. Maybe it'll work out better at Tennessee than it worked out at Texas A&M. I don't know. And as far as I know, Tennessee's not doing that across the board like Texas A&M was, or else they'd have a way better recruiting class than they currently do. Tennessee, what are they, 6th or 7th in the SEC? Par for the course. Par for the course, Tard, man. Anyway, bad team versus bad culture. Now have a bad team. Look at Alabama. Compared to what we're used to, this is a bad Alabama team, okay? I don't think Alabama's got a culture problem. I don't. It's just a bad team this year. The pieces didn't fit. You know, they got hung out to dry at the wide receiver position, and offensive line has not lived up to the hype. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. That's pretty much it in a nutshell for Bama. I don't think it's a culture problem there. I still think Bama's got one of the best cultures around. Clearly, culture pretty good at Georgia. Again, it's harder to name the teams that have good cultures because you don't hear about that. You just don't hear about it. You hear about bad culture when it gets so bad and the losses pile up. That's when you hear about it. So you're hearing about it now at Miami. The parents are complaining like high school. I mean, these are like T-ball moms out here, crying to the umpire and the coach that their kid ain't playing enough. Imagine this Miami player's mom, right? He's sitting there watching Miami lose by 80 points to Middle Tennessee. What, she runs to Mario Cristobal's office after the game? If you'd have played my kid, we wouldn't have lost by 80 to Middle Tennessee State. We'd only lost by 70.